welcome to the Caregiving Essentials Webinar Series. My name is Christine Kennedy, and on behalf of the Office of Alumni Engagement and McMaster University Continuing Education, I'd like to thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the land on which we reside, McMaster University, recognizes and acknowledges that it is located on the traditional territories of the Mississauga and Haudenosaunee Nations and within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Before I introduce our speakers today, I'd like to mention a few housekeeping items. If you have any questions or comments, please click chat at the bottom of your screen and the chat box will open and you can type in your questions or comments there. Just be mindful that the chat is open to the public, so please do not put any personal information that you would want or you wouldn't want many people to know or to have. If you would like the closed captioning feature, you can activate that by going to the bottom of your screen and clicking live transcript, and then that will occur. And a reminder that today's webinar is being recorded, and you will receive an email in the next week or so with a link to that recording. So our speakers today are a wonderful set of women who are coming and talking to you about a really important topic, when loss and grief multiply, how we deal with sorrow, and it's something that's part of the human condition, but it doesn't make it any easy, does it? So our host today is Donna. Donna is a caregiver, author, and educator. She is the author of 2 best-selling books on caregiving, including The Unexpected Journey of Caring. Donna also facilitates our free online course for caregivers. As you are well aware, this Caregiving Essentials Webinar Series is part of the Caregiving Essentials online course. She's both the co-designer and co-instructor of the Family Engagement in Research course. Today, Donna is going to be talking with Julie Keon. Julie is a Life Cycle Celebrant, and she has specialized in ceremonies and rituals related to death, dying, remembering, grieving, and healing. In December of 2017, Julie released the revised and expanded edition of her book, What I Would Tell You, One Mother's Adventure with Medical Fragility, which shares the wisdom gained from mothering a child with extraordinary needs and disabilities. Currently, Julie is employed as a residential hospice in the Ottawa Valley as the grief and bereavement counselor. In her community, Julie teaches a death preparation course, hosts death cafes, which I thought was really cool. Had to Google that, Julie. Very interesting. Hopefully you can talk about that. And she cares for community members as an end-of-life doula. Thank you both for joining us, and I'll hand it over to you, Donna.
Oh, thank you so much. I am just delighted to be here today with you, Julie, because you and I have known each other for many years now, I think, and
Yeah.
I have long admired your compassionate work and your wisdom. I want to ask you first, Julie, how did you come into the work that you do to support patients and families through very serious illness, through grief, sorrow, and through all of these, the hardest aspects of the human experience? You are there. You know what to say and what to do. How did you learn this? How did you become the person you are today?
Well, if I go way, way back, I grew up in a small town, and my mother was a nurse. And so we were very comfortable and familiar around dying and death, because my mom used to send us out to bring food to people who were dying at home. She would take us with us sometimes to visit people. We went to a lot of funerals. We were just around dying and death as children and growing up. And I think part of that is growing up in a rural community. But, fast forward many, many years, my grandmother died at home in New Year's Day of 2011. And it was her death that prompted me to start thinking about how we die and how we can do it better, especially because I have a child who is considered palliative. And so that started that whole path, and that's where I've ended up. But I started out at the birth end. I was a birth doula and childbirth educator. I did all of that 25 years ago. So now I'm on the other end of the life cycle.
Yeah.
kind of by chance, really.
There used to be a show on CBC, I think it was, that was called Hatching,
Hatching,
Matching, and
matching,
Dispatching.
dispatching. Yeah.
Birth,
Yeah.
marriages, and death,
Yes. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Womb
Yeah.
to tomb. Yeah.
The womb to tomb.
Yeah.
Yeah. But now you are, um, in the trenches of grief. And I have so many questions. How did you, how did you come, first of all, to work in the hospice? How did that happen? And tell us what your day looks like there.
Well, so I was a marriage officiant first. That was my middle career. And shortly after I did maybe my third marriage, I had a funeral director who was a guest at a wedding asked me if I would do funerals. That's what started that part of the death work. Um, but I was interested in providing more support to the families that I was serving because I was with them through very obviously very shocking times when I would meet with them initially after a death. And so I decided to get registered with the Ontario College of Social Workers and Social Service Workers after 25 years since I graduated. And decided to contact our local hospice. I knew they didn't have a counselor and I wanted to have some experience. And so that just was supposed to be just a short term, 10 hours a week, just to get my feet wet and as part of my registration. And then that turned into a job offer 2 days a week and then 3 days a week. And now they would like me to be there 5 days a week, but I just cannot manage that with my life right now. So that's how I ended up there. And I'm the grief and bereavement counselor. So I manage the grief and bereavement volunteer team. But we provide support to the people who are dying. We call them our guests because hospice is like a home away from home. Their family members. And I also see people in the community for one-on-one counseling. There's no charge, with any of our services. So anyone can come for counseling, which is wonderful. And mostly traumatic deaths. I see people who have had loved ones die in a, unexpected, tragic way. And then we run caregiver support groups, nurturing the caregiver workshops, grief support groups. I do all kinds of educational workshops. So I do a lot of things in 3 days. My mothering has prepared me for this job. I'm very organized.
Wow. Oh, I wish, in my caregiving life, I would have been able to take advantage of programs like you're describing because every one of us needs that support. We have a question in the chat from Lyle who's asking, are the support issues or the type of support, is it different between slow deaths and sudden deaths? So, and similarly, are there differences in the support that you think is best between death at home and a death in the hospital or hospice?
So I'll answer maybe that question first. I think my work as a birth doula has really impacted my work as an end of life doula. And first of all, I think people need to have all of the information so that they can make informed choices. I think there's a lot of people who want to die at home. Unfortunately, you need a good team of people that can care for you 24/7, that are able to do the care that's involved. Our healthcare system is struggling. We don't have staff to come in from home care agencies to help. So people then often end up in hospital or hospice. But as far as where we die, I think that comes down to the individual and where they're going to feel safest. Just like with birthing women, if you're going to feel safer in the hospital, then that's where you should give birth. And it's the same with dying. I think we can have our ideal space where we wish to die, and we also need to be open to the fact that we may have to die elsewhere. With the support, people can have traumatic bereavement from an expected death, and I think that's something people don't realize. And on the other side of that, people can have someone die unexpectedly in a car accident or by suicide, and not actually have a traumatic component to it. So it really depends on the individual. It depends on their coping skills, personality, the relationship they had with the person. But certainly, I think people could benefit from grief support no matter what, simply because our culture is full of misinformation about grieving. So I think it could just help people just to be validated in how they're going through the bereavement.
Yes. I want to get to understanding progressive, compounding grief and sorrow a little bit more. And I am going to get to the questions that are popping up in the chat too. But the first thing that I want to ask you, Julie, is about when somebody, and I'm thinking particularly with progressive diseases, Alzheimer's caregivers are just, we are not equipped. There is nothing in our experience that is going to prepare us for the combination of anticipatory grief, anticipatory loss, progressive loss, compounding complex grief that's mixed with the relationship that you had before with this person. Many people have, we all have complicated relationships with our parents to begin with. And then you add on this kind of the long goodbye, the and ALS is the same. So is sometimes Parkinson's. Many diseases are progressive. And so I'm wondering if you can describe the particular kind of grieving that people go through when they are faced with progressive loss.
So the person caring for them, or the person who has the illness?
The caregiver.
The caregiver, yeah. The caregivers, well, I believe that so much anguish comes from simply not recognizing that what they're experiencing is a type of grief. That when you're caring for somebody who has a progressive illness, or a life expectancy surpasses the life expectancy, you're exhausted, you're stressed, all the things that come up with it, not to mention all the things you see everybody else doing that you're not able to do. So we're bombarded with living losses regularly. And anytime there's loss, there's usually grief. And I think that caregivers specifically have a form of chronic sorrow. I've said this to caregivers that I feel it's almost insulting when we go to our doctors and we're told we're depressed. We're given a diagnosis of depression, because I feel that it's so much deeper than that. It's a chronic sorrow of having to face losses over and over and over and over, and not having the space to grieve those losses. When we can recognize that this grief is part of this experience, that we need to walk alongside it, that we have to make space for it, that relieves a lot of the anxiety around, we're not handling this well, what's wrong with me, I should be happy, I shouldn't feel sad, how dare I, this is my mother, or this is my spouse, or my child. So that goes a long way with people, just to be validated in what they're experiencing.
Mm-hmm. And there is an arc, right? There is a beginning of this grieving that's associated with disease progression, and then there's an end, or not. I mean, but I guess my first question, there are lots of questions in the chat, and we will get to them all.
We needed 2 hours for this today.
I know, we do.
I have to make my answers shorter.
It's such an important discussion that
Yeah.
nobody ever has. So I guess my first question, Julie, is, and you know this firsthand, how do you keep giving care when you're grieving so deeply? How do you not make medication errors? How do you not drop your loved one? How do you not have a car accident? How do you keep going in the face of so much painful, deep emotions that are often, you know, it's very hard to articulate what you're feeling when you're in that state. Often you're misunderstood. Maybe you look angry. Maybe the doctor misinterprets your grief for depression or something clinical. So how does one, we can't stop giving care. We cannot do that. So how do you deal with your grief if you're in the thick of caregiving still?
Well, I mean, it's not easy. You have to put it aside a lot of the time. Uh, with that said, you also have to give it space. So I used to say Meredith's hair grew from the tears that dropped on the top of her head, when I would be holding her for hours on end, for the first, I don't know, 8 years, holding her and just being so exhausted and so overwhelmed. And I would sit there and I would cry, and my tears would drop on the top of her head. And I used to think like, oh my God, like the poor kid, her head is being watered by my tears. Um, by expressing the emotions and honoring them and having self-compassion, I think is a real key to this. It's important to have self-compassion, just simply to be able to tolerate all of this hard, heavy emotions that come with caregiving. And it can literally be setting aside 10 minutes that you just go upstairs and stick your face in a pillow and scream, or cry, making space to connect with your community, like these kinds of discussions, getting outside for a walk, breathing, learning breathing techniques that will help your nervous system. It's little things that can go a long way. It has to be acknowledged and expressed. And therapy's a good thing as well. When we hold all that in, it has to move. And when we hold it in, I think that's where we create, a chronic state of depression where we start having a lot of anxiety and that kind of thing. It usually, I think, is connected to the emotions that we always have to keep tucked away to cope. I don't know if that really answers your question.
Well, it does, but I guess I think it's not necessarily very easy to give yourself the space to express the grief that you feel. I mean, sometimes I know personally that I have felt that it's a betrayal of the person I love to express grief, because what we're trying to do is prop up something positive all the time. I mean, I never want people I love I don't want to think about them as tragic. I think there's a lot of things we tell ourselves in our heads that keep us from being able to experience and express grief.
Yep.
And those things are deeply embedded in the values that are in our society about pull yourself together, in even like in the fighter language of disease, so-and-so lost their battle, so-and-so won their battle with cancer or whatever it is. And I guess maybe we have to just actively reject some of that language.
1,000,000%. Guilt is the annoying first cousin of grief. And anybody who is grieving guilt is always close by. So part of allowing ourselves to grieve our losses is, first of all, self-compassion. I'm human. This is hard. It's okay that I feel this way. That's all very important. It's also recognizing that we can hold grief and joy together. And I think we try to ignore or bypass our grief because of this shame that how could we think so, like for
Yeah.
me as a mother, how could I be sad and be grieving when I have this incredibly beautiful child who I wouldn't change for anything. I wouldn't change anything about the last 20 years aside from her suffering. Um, when we recognize that we can hold both, I can love my child and sacrifice everything for her as her mother, and I can also be really sad when I see kids walking by on the first day of school. You know, when I see people saying, oh, these are my kids dressed up for Halloween and they're going out trick-or-treating and la la la, all the things that we have missed out on, you know, that we'll never experience because she is our only child. So that is such an important part of this, that it doesn't have to be one or the other. And we do live in a society that is saturated in toxic positivity. We live in a society that is death denying. We don't like to have hard discussions. We don't like to talk about grief. We tell people, you know, are you still grieving? It's been 3 weeks. Are you still sad? Well, of course you are, because you never stop grieving. There's no ending. There's no 5 stages. There's so much misinformation out there, which is why I have a job, honestly, because I spend most of my time, you know, having to stand up to a society that has really gotten it all wrong. So when people come to me and they're so upset because they feel they're doing it all wrong, having someone like me say, well, it sounds like you're doing it all right. There's nothing wrong with how you're grieving. What a relief. Now they can put all that anxiety aside and get to the task of grieving and owning their sorrow. And that's, you know, that's such a big part of it.
Yeah. You know, I remember when I was a teenager, my father had 3 strokes, and I got into this weird headspace that was extremely unhealthy, that I thought if I started to cry, I would never stop. That the power of my grief was so strong that if I let it out a tiny bit, it would explode the world. And so it took me then I had a kind of breakdown like 8 years later.
Yeah.
Because you can't go through life thinking that you cannot express grief. It's so unhealthy.
Feelings buried alive never die. They will wait. And I see mothers, I see spouses who, through our sessions over months, I see the emotion come about here and they're like they're visibly trying to push it down. And I'll say, just let that come up. You can just let it come up here and leave it here. And I will hold it for you till next week. And then months and months and months later, they come in and they say, I thought this was supposed to get easier. Now I'm crying all the time. I used to be able to control it. And therein lies the problem. It has to be expressed. Now, with that said, some people aren't big criers and they grieve perfectly well and healthily, and that's fine too. For most people, there has to be this expression of, and the longer we hold on to it, the bigger it gets. There's that saying, what we resist persists, and that is the way it is with grief, you know. And it's, if we can just trust that we're hardwired to love and attach, which means we are hardwired to grieve when that attachment is broken, or when we lose anything that we're attached to, or that you know, any loss can lead to grief. If we can trust that we're hardwired to do this and reach out for support if we feel unsteady, we'll save ourselves so much heartache. We got to get out of our own way and surrender to the grief. Got to happen.
Yeah, it does. And I remember, being in the middle of labor, childbirth, and saying, okay, I'm packing my bag. I'm leaving. Just, this is not going to happen. I'm not having a good time here. And grief is a bit like that. You cannot pack your bag and leave. This is a natural process. It needs to happen. But I'm looking at the chat and I'm thinking, some of the comments link back to one of the questions that we received before this webinar. There's an inquiry into toxic positivity. And one of the questions that we had was, what is something helpful that you could say to someone who is grieving? What are the words that we need to hear from someone else that are actually helpful, as opposed to, are you still grieving? Or, oh, you'll feel better. It's all for a reason. Or any of these platitudes that
make you stronger,
make you want to rip somebody's throat out, quite frankly.
You'll only be given what you can handle. Not true.
That's not true.
Well, I'm all about being very, straightforward. I don't mince words. I sit with people who are facing death and they're terrified and they don't want, and I say to them, you don't want to be here. Nobody wants to be at a hospice. And if you have to be somewhere, this isn't the worst place to be, really. But there aren't really words to say to soothe the enormity of this experience that you're going through. So
what about families, though? Like, if somebody was to go away, are there some words that are more helpful to say to a family member who is grieving, needs to grieve, needs to sit with grief, that you tend to find yourself using with families more often than not? Because I'm thinking that some people who are caregivers listening today might have a conversation at home and say over dinner, you know what? I learned some words today that I need to hear, even if I say them to myself.
Yeah. Well, just the, sometimes there aren't words. There aren't words for this experience. However, I trust your ability to do this. I'm here for you. I'm going to show up with food. I'm going to show up with tea. I'm just going to show up and be present for you to say or cry or do what you need to do. Because if you can just keep in your back pocket that grief isn't something to be cured or fixed or managed, that we just need to be there to help people hold it. That's it. Because people who are grieving don't need advice. They don't need that kind of, just let me know if you need anything.
Oh, yeah.
Because nobody ever calls up and says, you know what I could use? I really could use some lasagna. We never do that. We don't call in our darkest hour and say, I'm really struggling. Can you come over here? I mean, unless you have one of those awesome besties that you can do that with, who lives in close proximity to you. I think it's really about letting the grieving person know that you trust that they are going to find their way, and that you are going to be there just to hold space for them. That's it. You don't have to say anything. You just need to sit there in their pain and not run from it, try to fix it, interrupt them, shove Kleenex in their face. That feels like you're doing absolutely nothing, and it is the most powerful thing you can do for somebody.
Yeah. That's
Not a
really
lot of
good
words
to
though.
know.
Sorry.
No, it's funny. That is really a description of true friendship. In of loving friendship, generous friendship. I read something in the New York Times some years ago that by David Brooks, and it really stuck with me. He described the piece is called On Suffering, I think, and he describes grieving as going down to the basement of the lowest of low that you think life could possibly ever be that painful. And then you crash through the floor of the basement and you find another basement underneath and you crash through that one and you keep going. And, it's like a discovery in a way of your range of emotion that we never feel apart from with deep chronic sorrow, and particularly if it's progressive. So there's a loss of mobility, there's a loss of vision, there's a loss of independence, there's a loss. And every one of those losses is grieved. Let's talk for a second about hope. How do we locate hope, or do we need to, in grief?
Yeah, that depends. I think if people are, it all depends on if you're doing it as a form of avoidance, because it all comes down to avoidance. So sometimes people will not go into their grief because they're like, well, I just, I hope that this won't last very long. I hope, we say hope. People often will say, I'm straying off a little bit, but people will say, well, I know it's in God's hands. So, we call that spiritual bypassing. Sometimes putting everything into our hope can distract us from the grief and the pain. I don't know if that makes any sense. I think there's just a discomfort with being in pain, and that's what we need to befriend, as opposed to trying always to find ways out of it or away from it or to sugarcoat it or any of that. And it's not easy, which is why having, good support is so important. I just think we spend too much time trying to figure out ways to do it in a way that it's not going to be as painful. And some people are very obvious. They drink or they get really busy. They work, 75 hours a week and they exhaust themselves because they just cannot bear the pain. And what you said earlier of, if I tap into this, it will destroy me. I will sink into a depression so far down that I'll never emerge. I will die from this. That's not what happens though, because we express these emotions. We'll cry hard for, quite a while. It does stop. And my God, it's such a relief. We feel so exhausted and can feel a shift and a movement in our body. There's such a physiological part of it as well. So sometimes people can only manage 5 minutes, and that's their homework. I'll say to them, this week, I want you just to set the timer for 5 minutes. And at the end of the 5 minutes, you have to stop. You have to stop crying. So they can feel that a little sense of control, because it feels so out of control.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's such a key idea to remember. It feels out of control, but actually there is another side to the crying. The crying stops. We keep on breathing. We keep putting one foot in front of the other. There is another side. And maybe that is where the hope lies, that that this is a lancing, in a way, of this toxic emotion. If we keep it in, it will poison us.
Yeah, I think, and I would caution referring to the emotion as toxic, because it's not, right?
It only becomes it if you keep it too
If
long.
you keep it, yeah. It just becomes sludgy and heavy, and then what I like to think, it tries to get your attention. So it's not the emotion itself, it's our lack of attention of the emotion.
Yeah. And so you mentioned earlier tools for grieving, and you used the word, and I was really intrigued by that.
Did I? I said tools.
Yeah, but what I'm thinking is, I'm remembering many conversations you and I have had about ritual and ceremony, and maybe we can conceive of those as tools for grieving. The last time we spoke, you were telling me about someone who had a very difficult relationship with her mother, and she needed to grieve the death, but she also needed to cleanse herself of some very painful memories. And can you tell us about the ceremony you did with the backpack?
Yeah, when you brought that up, it took me a minute. I thought, now which one is she talking about? Now I know the one you mean.
You do so many.
This is a woman who asked me to help her to have a personal ceremony, which means that I work one-on-one with her. And we decided to do it Easter weekend, because for her that was, rebirth, springtime, that kind of thing. And we went to a property along the river. Her homework the week before, when we went to the river to kind of talk about how we were going to do this, I had her bring a backpack, and I had her collect rocks from the river bed. And she didn't know what she was doing. I just said, we need to collect these rocks. But I said to her, for this week, when when you get home, you're going to write down on each rock an emotion that you need to release, some part of this that you need to finally release once and for all. Because her mother was very abusive. Her mother had died. And so she did that with, water marker, whatever, that wasn't going to stay on the rocks. And then I said to her, now when you go home this week, every time you're not at work, you have to put the backpack on. And it probably had about 40 pounds worth of rocks. So she wore it while she was washing dishes. I wanted her to feel the physical heaviness and weight of what she had been carrying around her whole life. So when we did the ceremony, part of that ceremony was, part of it was nurturing her and caring for her, just doing like a reflexology on her feet and wrapping her in a warm blanket, and essentially mothering her and letting her know that she could mother herself. And then she went down to the river, and she took each rock and she threw those rocks, and she yelled and she screamed, and we warned the neighbors down the river that if they heard yelling, that it was fine. And it was so primal and guttural, and she screamed and she cried, and it was just, to witness that. And I just stood there, and she felt safe with me. She knew she was safe. We built a fire. She burned every photo she had of her mother, every photo she had of herself that she hated because she knew what happened behind that photo. She burned it all. She threw them all in the fire, and then her husband, who had waited way down the road, we called him to come, and he then took part of the ceremony as well. So it was so powerful.
Healing. Oh my goodness, primal being the right word to describe that. And I wonder if you could describe, Julie, that is one way of demonstrating, of illustrating a particular type of grief. But when there is so much love in the grief, how can you give us another example of a ceremony that any one of us could do to be able to help us feel the feelings? A ceremony somehow gives us permission to feel the feelings, which is why all the great religions have so much ceremony. It's all about emotion. So maybe, can you think of something that...
Yeah, I do this one every single year for myself. I do it on the winter solstice, only because I'm not a big fan of winter, and the solstice marks the longest, darkest day of the year. And after that date, usually December 21st, the days start to get longer. So we look forward to the spring and hope and growth and all those things. What I do on that evening is I sit in the dark. Usually my husband takes part willingly. Sometimes I invite people who just need to have this kind of ceremony, and I usually will have a part of it, which is the acknowledging the darkness of the past year. You know, what were the hardest parts of this year? What were the hardest parts of this journey of caregiving? And they write it down on little pieces of paper. They don't have to share it with anyone. I have a big bowl in the center of the table. If they want to speak it, it's good to speak it out loud. I find it gives it more power, more release. They put the paper in the water. It's magic paper. It totally dissolves. This is like a Coles Note version of the ceremony, but people can do this easily. And then I usually have a little dish of sunflowers, those Russian mammoth sunflowers that I plant in the spring. And everybody holds it in their hands, and they think about what they want to do, you know, for the future, for the next year. What is the light they want to bring in? And maybe it's like, I think I really need to start dealing with the last 10 years of this caregiving. I think I need to talk to somebody, or I think I'm finally going to join a support group, or whatever it might be that's going to help you along in a way. And it's a seed that you're holding. So you're planting the seed in your mind, but you're also holding a seed. And then they can take that seed home and plant it in the spring. I usually keep them in a container because I usually have lots of seeds to plant. And then I take that water and I pour it along the wheelchair ramp where I plant the sunflowers. And I know that in the spring, when all the snow melts and I plant my little seeds, that earth has had the letting go. The earth takes care of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a simple one, but it's
it's a beautiful one. It's so loving. It's so full of self-love, self-compassion, but also so much love for others too, the other people in your family you're caring for. I want to go to the chat for a minute.
Sure.
And we have lots of chat here.
We have 15 minutes.
Tessa asked, I wonder if we prepare ourselves well enough for loss and grief and death. I think we don't. Not for ourselves or for each other.
No.
But there are programs that we can participate in that can help us be whole in this area. And, think of the number of baby books there are out there. What to expect in the first year, what to expect when you're pregnant, blah, 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 millions of books. We don't have a lot. I mean, on Being Mortal, Ato Gawande's wonderful book, and now Sammy Winemaker's and CNCL's fantastic new book too. But there aren't very many of them that talk about what you're talking about. And
no.
You need to write a new book, Julie.
Well, I'm working on it. 8 years ago, though, I did start a course that I teach called Ready or Not, Preparing for the Inevitable. And I started doing that course because after my grandmother died, I thought, oh man, we're in trouble. And I ended up doing a 300-hour course in community-led death care and death midwifery. And so I developed this course for the community for healthy people, not terminally ill people. And it's a hard sell. I mean, when I taught prenatal classes, I had waiting lists for months in advance. They were great classes. This is also a great class. However, nobody wants to acknowledge that they're going to die, but the transformation that happens in 6 weeks for people to get all of these things done on a weekly basis and get it all packed away in a beautiful little box that's called their farewell box. It's unbelievable. It far exceeds what I ever expected the course to be. And now I'm developing one for parents like me to do their death preparation, but they're also will be prepared for their child's death along with themselves. I offered this 2 years ago. I had no interest, 2 likes on the post, and now it's been shared many times, and I have people contacting me from all over North America, which means the timing is right for this type of course. And I think COVID helped with that.
It is. And, I mean, here Claudia is saying, even in the chat, what tool to grieve a son with disabilities who is 23 years old? I'm old. And I'm old too. And our son's 35.
Yeah.
I'm 68. I mean, we're getting
What
old.
is your secret, Donna? That's what we want to know. We're all putting in the chat. What?
Not being afraid to cry.
There you go. Yeah.
See, water my face with my tears. Yeah, that's one of them.
The trick is there's no way around it. We have to grieve. We have to be okay with our human selves, that there's parts of this that really suck. That's a reality. But that doesn't take away the love we have for our kids.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. And even in caregiver support groups, often we can cry with each other because there's so much shared grief. The sharing of grief, I find, is helpful. I just came from the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence Summit, and there were so many tears in that ballroom of the conference. I mean, I got up and spoke at one point. I couldn't stop crying. It was very public and a display of sadness. And honestly, the next minute we were laughing at some dark joke,
But that's what happens.
Yeah.
That's what happens. When you move that energy, it's usually followed by joy.
Yeah.
It's the only way. And it's not I should grieve and then I'm done after I go through some magical 5 stages, which, by the way, is totally incorrect. It's just part of this. I have learned to accept that some days I wake up and I feel kind of sad, and I go, what's that about? Oh yeah, Meredith probably has to have surgery, but they're not really sure they want to do it, and she's suffering. And that makes me really sad, and it makes me really angry, and I acknowledge that. And I'm okay with it.
Yeah, of course, because what other reaction would be like appropriate? That's it. That's the right response.
Yes, except that a lot of people feel they always have to be on and positive and superhuman parents, and or caregivers, and it's not possible.
No. Suzanne in the chat has said, when my husband, who was quadriplegic for 10 years, passed, I found that after a while, I allowed myself 10 minutes of playing our song, I'm going to cry, loudly while I cried and grieved. Then I was able to get on with the rest of my day.
Yep. Whatever it takes. Sometimes you have to put on sad music, you have to put on a sad movie. Whatever will let your grief know that it's safe and it's okay to come to the table. That's what you do.
Yeah, it's like if it's in a trough and it's flowing, it needs edges, right? So it doesn't go all over the place. And that song sounded like it was the trough for
Yeah.
the flow.
Yeah.
And it's kind of contained, but you can, that song lasts maybe 3.5 minutes or something. And, or, Suzanne, I can just visualize that. Thank you so much for sharing. And Anne Marie says, have you noticed a difference in how men versus women, boys versus girls deal with loss, grief, and living forward with it? I've noticed a gap in the healing community for boys and men to find a space to express and feel safe to do so. I'm so glad you said that, Anne Marie. And what are your thoughts, Julie?
I literally said yesterday at work that I need to start a men's grief group, simply because men do not come to the grief groups generally. My caseload is mostly women. My course that I teach on preparing for death, 9 times out of 10 women. If we think that we have a difficult time with grief, imagine if from a young age you've been told that men don't cry and you got to be strong and you got to pull up your bootstraps and all of that, whatever baloney. So men, men of a particular age, especially in their late 60s, 70s, 80s, they don't come in with just the loss, the initial loss. It's the loss that occurred the last 50, 60 years that has never been acknowledged. And all it takes is one big loss to bring up all the grief that has never been expressed. And it's very challenging for them because it is extremely overwhelming.
Yeah. And Julie, a number of people in the chat are asking for your contact details. And maybe can we share them? I think we have them, and I think we can
I can type it in too, I think, eh?
Okay, sure, yeah. And Susan, when I lost my son, I sat in my chair in the corner of my room and watched Hallmark movies for 2 years. Yeah.
And that's what you needed to do.
Oh, yes.
We can figure out what we need, and nobody has a right to tell us, what we need to be doing. Sometimes people say, I just want to stay in bed. I just want to stay in bed for a week. And I say, then stay in bed for a week. And they think, well, I can't because I'll get depressed. And then you're grieving.
Yeah.
Get into bed, have some parameters. You got to get up and take a shower, maybe put some fresh pajamas on and bring snacks and do all the things. But give yourself space to do that. That's what you think you need.
I'm so glad you said that, because early in the chat, someone wrote, is it automatic that you get depression and anxiety with grief?
No, it's not automatic, but it's common. And I think it goes back to just our complete lack of understanding and knowledge of what grief is. And it always is much, much more difficult and overwhelming than we ever imagine it will be. And so we automatically assume that there's something wrong with us. And there isn't. Grief is that hard.
Yeah, it is. Elonda has written something beautiful here. I have been writing a letter to my husband daily for the past 3 years since his passing. The heartache softens as the memories remain joy-filled. And that makes me think that I had it on my list to ask you, what is the role of memory in grieving? How do we, because I know personally the losses that I've had, and I think of what Arthur Kleinman said in his book, The Soul of Care. He wrote that caregiving doesn't end with the death of the person you're caring for, because after they die, you care for their memories. And yeah, I love that. So I'm wondering if you could just say something about the role of memory, because sometimes it can be so sad and sometimes it can be full of joy.
It's one of the reasons why people will pack up a house faster than you can imagine within 72 hours or a week of the death. Everything, every reminder, everything is gone. And again, that is a effort to avoid all these reminders of this life that you shared with the person who died, for example. But memories can be heartbreaking at the beginning. Every single memory, everything will remind you of that person. Just going out to the grocery store, big trigger place. You walk by the certain cookies that you always picked up for that person, or you run into people who might say unhelpful things to you, or you see people who saw you, but now they're avoiding you because you kind of have the grief plague. Or the elevator music, all of a sudden you burst into tears, trying to choose your bananas. So at the beginning, everything reminds you of the person or triggers a memory of the person. And that's why it's so overwhelming. But that as we remember them and let ourselves sit with that and cry and grieve that, those memories become more joyful. People often worry, things like, well, I don't want to see my loved one at hospice because I don't want to remember them that way. But the human brain is quite fascinating for the most part. Initially, you remember them in the hospital bed or whatever, but eventually your brain, that kind of fades and you only think of them when they were healthy and well. And, that tends to be the way it goes. Not always, but.
Yeah. Well, Julie, it's 2 minutes before 1 o'clock, and we need to bring this incredible conversation to a close, unfortunately. I'm going to ask our team at McMaster to copy the questions and in the chat and in the Q&A, because we weren't able to get to all of them. What I will try to do is take those questions, and maybe you and I, after this, can try to answer them and put them in the next Caregiving Essentials newsletter. And then I think that would make some interesting reading. So I want to thank you so much. I always love talking to you, Julie. You're just the wisest woman that I know. And I appreciate it deeply on a personal level. And I know that everyone here has just gonna go away with their cup filled too.
I hope so. We could do this for hours. And
we could. I know.
I wish I could read all of the comments, because I know people are sharing, personal stories, and I wish I could read them all, and I don't think I'll be able to unless I'm allowed to after we shut down. I don't know. But I did provide my email and my website. So please, if you had a question that you're still wondering about, I'm happy to email you back and answer, or anything that you wish to share that didn't get touched on. I'm happy to do that.
Oh, thank you, Julie. And over to you, Christine.
Thank you. Thank you, Donna. So one question, because I don't know the answer to this. Julie is asking, where do I access this newsletter that you speak of?
Oh, is there something that goes out? Isn't there or maybe I meant the email. Do people get an email if they registered? And could we include some text there?
Yeah, we can do that. Or maybe we can do a special edition or something with all of those questions. Yes. So what we can do is I can download the chat, and then maybe offline we'll talk about this. Yes, because there were definitely, and everyone can see the questions in the chat. So people may be thinking like, oh, that was a really good question. I'd like to have that addressed. So yes, to everyone, we will figure something out for you all.
Okay, great. And I know there are some questions in the Q&A as well.
Yes.
So we can definitely do that. And if you, we will give a shout out for the Caregiving Essentials free online course that you get a McMaster micro credential if you are successful, and you can do the quizzes over and over again till you get them right and you get your micro credential. And there is a newsletter that goes out with for course registrants as well. That's full of great reading. But everybody that registered for today's event will receive the email with the link to the YouTube recording of today's session. And hopefully we can also just pen some reflections to questions that were posed as well.
That sounds fantastic. So maybe we can also put a plug in for our next Caregiving Essentials, which is in less than a month, December the 12th at noon Central. No, what are we? Eastern. We're not Central, Eastern. I am in Hamilton. It's Eastern. So next month, Donna is going to be joined by Dr. Nathan Stahl, and he is going to be talking about caring for complex seniors, advice from the front line as a medical doctor. He's a geriatrician. Is that correct?
Yes, he's always on the CBC. He's very famous. He's fantastic. He's at Mount Sinai and works closely with Dr. Samir Sinha. And they both together are doing the Canadian Senior Strategy. So I very much look forward to talking with Nathan. He's really friendly and lovely man. And he and I both have an interest in complex caregiving. So we're going to be talking about seniors and complex care.
Excellent. So if you're interested in that, I think Jen has just put something in has put the Zoom link in, and also that will come up. Well, you'll get emails. We're always sending out emails to everyone so that you don't miss anything. You are a very loyal group of people, and so we thank you for that. And it's really wonderful to see, because obviously at the back end of the webinar, we can see everyone who has joined, and it's so lovely to see people who come regularly and to see fresh faces. And, I can see when people are typing in the chat, I recognize the names. So thank you everyone for joining us today and for sharing. These topics are difficult, right? Grief and sorrow is difficult. So putting yourself out there and talking in the chat is something that we really admire. And hopefully by sharing, it is two-dimensional, we're not in a room, but hopefully by sharing your thoughts and, some of the issues that you're having or some of the solutions that you've come up with, and sharing this with everyone, that this is a really great forum for people to come together and just reflect and share. So thank you, Donna and Julie, for a wonderful talk. We look forward to seeing everyone next week. Take care. Not next week, sorry, next month. Although I have another webinar next week. But thank you. I have lots of webinars. People are probably getting sick of me. Christine, you're on it again. But thank you, everyone. Take care, and we'll see you again. Bye now.
Thank you, everyone.